Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to another episode in this series, Londoniyyah. Today, inshallah, we're going to be exploring Hinduism, one of the, if not the most, the oldest Indic religion in the subcontinent, and the religion that is the third most followed religion in the world. And this is going to be a participant-led type of seminar where I'll be acting more of a facilitator than a lecturer in that sense. And we've got some, obviously, our usual colleagues today from Sapience UK and some guests from the US as well. In fact, we've got a guest from Zaytuna College who's going to be also contributing, rather, Ahmed Khan. And so what we're going to do, inshallah, in this session, we are going to be going through some of the major compartments and categories of the Hindu religion, if it is indeed even appropriate to call Hinduism as a religion. Things like the gods that Hindus believe in, whether or not they are seen as mythological even by Hindus themselves, or whether they are seen as true gods of some sorts. We're going to be looking at some of the rituals of Hinduism, or some of the practices that Hindus actually do. And we are going to be talking also about reincarnation. And the scriptures is another thing we're going to be discussing, because of course scriptures are important to any type of religion that we discuss. But before we do any of that, we've got a brother from California who wants to start off by introducing some important themes before we go ahead and talk about those things. So, Brother Ahmed, tell us you've done some research yourself on Hinduism, and you're interested in the area. You're also a comparative religionist. What is your take on Hinduism? How can we conceive it best?
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Amma ba'd. So I think right from the onset, it's important for us to understand that there's a lot of preconceived notions that our community has about Hinduism. And one reason being is because it's such a difficult religion for us to understand. And one of our great scholars, Al-Biruni, who wrote the famous Hind, stated that Hinduism is a very difficult religion for Muslims to understand for several reasons, particularly one, the language barrier. And one of the fascinating things that we'll find, inshallah, about Hinduism is that some of our greatest scholars, like Al-Biruni, such as Prince Mohammed Hijab, such as Sheikh Hamid, Dr. Ali Atai, it's clear that Hinduism has a level of monotheism within it. But the question arises as what strand of Hinduism are we discussing? And I think it's important to understand this because in religious studies today, there is this narrative that monotheism is something that was developed. It was not there at the initial stages. But what we find is when we study many of these quote-unquote polytheistic religions, including Hinduism, and when we understand Hinduism according to what the educated, what scholars believe, we find that many of them are advocating a similar version of monotheism that you find in the Judaic Abrahamic tradition. And so I think just to really deeply understand this, if we can understand Hinduism, we can unlock the door to all of the polytheistic religions, because they all have the same structure within them. Whether it's the ancient Greeks, whether it's ancient Egypt, or any other polytheistic society, as the great comparative religionist Wilhelm Schmidt said, all follow the same structure. And he says the way polytheism, we'll get into this later inshallah, but he says the way polytheism develops is you have several tribes come together, each of them have the same God, but because they refer to that God with different names, people associate these as being different gods. In reality, they're the same. It's just a difference of command. So I think that's what we'll find in Hinduism as well, inshallah. So that's all I wanted to say.
All right. Well, I think that's important because we sometimes do have a problem with classification. One where we say, well, this religion is a polytheistic religion, or it's a monotheistic religion, or it's a pantheistic religion, or whatever it is. And Hinduism seems to stand out as a religion which can be interpreted in all of those ways, or any of those ways. But let's start with that. I think that's probably a good place to start, with the gods of Hinduism. So, who has done the research today for the gods of Hinduism? You've done it, right? So, could you, whilst I put my phone on charge, so we don't lose a brother from California, right? So, let's get started with the first presentation, inshallah, on the gods of Hinduism.
So from my understanding of reading about the gods of Hindu gods,
yeah,
Hindus believe in a single universal god, like the brother mentioned, known as Brahman. But they also have a god and a goddess, which are also called Deva and Devi, who represent more than one aspect of the Brahman. Brahman is like the reality, like the ultimate reality.
I'm not able to hear him. Is someone speaking?
Yeah, someone's speaking. If you're not able to hear him, I'll summarize what he said. Okay.
They also have some kind of like a kind of trinity, which with some of the main gods, Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma, which is Brahman and Brahma. Brahman is the reality and Brahma is the god. Some of the qualities of these gods include Shiva is known as the destroyer. It's known as, it represents death, dissolution and destruction of the world. So it can be recreated by Brahma. So Brahma can recreate this destruction again. But he's also considered the master of dance and regeneration. One of the godheads in Hindu Trinity. He has many names like Mahadeva, Pashupati, Nata, many names. I cannot really pronounce them. He's represented either in blue skin human form or as a Palic symbol called Shiva Lingam. The other god part of the Trinity would be Krishna. Krishna is also represented. Krishna would be the eighth generation of, the eighth incarnation of Vishnu, and so Vishnu, Rama, and Krishna would be the same god.
Okay.
So Vishnu is a male figure, but Rama and Krishna would be like more female figures. So
Krishna.
Yeah.
Krishna is female.
That's why I understand.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. And Vishnu is what, more male?
Yeah, Vishnu is so it's not like just one gender.
Mm-hmm.
So Krishna is defined as one of the most beloved Hindu gods. Blue-skinned Krishna is the deity of love and compassion. It's frequently depicted with a flute, which is used for its seductive powers. Krishna
who's that has got the flute?
Krishna.
Okay. Is that the one with the blue skin, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Has she got 4 arms?
Not really 2 arms.
Okay. so I think I'm confused.
It's really confusing because they have so many different characteristics that you can't really. Krishna is the central character in the Hindu scriptures, Bhagavad Gita, as well as avatar of Vishnu, the sustainer of Hindu Trinity. Krishna is widely revered among Hindus, and his followers are known as Vaishnavas.
Okay, interesting.
Rama is the god of truth and virtue, and is another avatar of Vishnu. It's the 7th incarnation.
Of who's the seventh incarnation of whom?
Of Vishnu. So Rama is the 7th incarnation of Vishnu. 7th, yeah.
Yeah. So Rama
Yeah,
is the seventh incarnation of Vishnu.
yeah.
Okay.
And Krishna, the ones we mentioned before, is the eighth reincarnation.
So who's the first incarnation of Vishnu?
Vishnu is the first.
What the second one?
God knows. I don't know.
Okay, right. Because we got to 7 and 8. So I was just wondering what
Yeah,
the other ones
that's
are.
all I found.
Are they all incarnations of each other?
Yeah.
Are
So
they?
it would be, from my understanding, it would be the same God, but reincarnated in different forms.
Okay. So, does anyone want to add? Thank you. That was very informative, actually.
I still have more.
Oh, you still have more?
Yeah.
No, go ahead, please. Yeah.
So Rama is the God of truth, and like I mentioned, Rama is widely believed to be part
What does it look like, Rama, again?
blue-skinned, 2 arms.
2 arms.
Yeah. The next one is Hanuman.
Hanuman was the monkey god, right?
Yeah. Hanuman is the monkey-faced human. Hanuman temples are amongst the most common public shrines found in India.
Hanuman temples.
Yeah.
Mm.
We go to the next one is Vishnu, which I should have started by. Yeah. Vishnu is defined as the peace-loving deity of the Hindus' Trinity. He's the preserver or sustainer of life. He represents the principles of order, righteousness, and truth. He's consort of Lakshmi, the goddess of domesticity and prosperity. Hindu faithful who pray to Vishnu is called Vaishnavas. Believes in times of disorder, Hindus believe in times of disorder, Vishnu will emerge from his transcendence to restore peace and order on earth, similar to what we believe about Prophet Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let me summarize that for Ahmed. Sorry about that, Ahmed. We had a bit of a moment there. So basically, and please correct me if I'm wrong, either of you, any of you, right? He was describing some of the gods that Hindus believe in, and he mentioned like 3 main gods: Brahma, Lakshmi, and Vishnu.
Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva.
Sorry, Brahma,
Shiva.
Shiva,
And Vishnu.
and Vishnu. These are the triune ones, right?
Yeah.
Lakshmi is another god, but she's
Yeah, Lakshmi is
Incarnation.
incarnation of whom?
it's like the goddess of Vishnu. It's the
Oh, okay.
goddess of Vishnu.
So the 3 main ones are
Vishnu,
Brahma, and
and Shiva.
Shiva.
But
Shiva is a female one.
yeah,
Fish.
but
Yeah.
nowadays people remember most Krishna. Krishna is the one that is more venerated nowadays.
Okay, and what was the thing you said about Krishna again? What
Krishna
does it look
is
like?
the reincarnation of it's the 8th.
Do we have any imagery of Krishna?
Yeah, so Vishnu had 10 incarnations. So whenever God wants to sort out the world, he sends an incarnation. Vishnu sends an incarnation of himself, and there were 10 incarnations.
Who Vishnu does
Yeah,
that?
Vishnu.
Okay.
And there are 10 incarnations of Vishnu in the world. So
Yeah.
they come into the world like human beings, like Jesus, basically, according to Christian tradition. So the 7th, and the most important was the 7th and the 8th. 7th was Rama, and 8th was Krishna.
Krishna.
So they were the like main incarnations of Vishnu. And the 3 gods is Vishnu, Shiva, and Brahma. But above them, there's something called the Brahman, which is basically, in some places, it just says ultimate reality. Yeah, so human beings are like our objective in life seems to be to gain unity with that or something like that.
Mm.
It seems to be a bit more complex than that, but I didn't look into it too much.
Got you. Okay. Yeah. Anyone else add on to it?
So I was from the research that I did, the way you mentioned this sort of this figure, this like the vast. Apparently, this is everything that's like.
So this is Brahman.
Yeah. So this is the Brahman. Yeah. This is like the ultimate sort of. This is like basically from what I understood, anyways, from what I was being told, that this is basically everything. So yeah. So that
Is
reality.
it one thing or is it?
No, so it's a bit paradoxical, but it's kind of it's like they'll say it's like everything and nothing, but it's like the ultimate reality.
Mm-hmm.
So everything else is like anything that's material is like a material manifestation of that being. So the idea is that when he creates, like he becomes sort of part manifest in those things, but then those things like they're made to forget him, So then the purpose of life, like say for example for human beings, is to like take on this sort of spirituality so that you can eventually you get this, what's it, like moksha or something like that, which is like to become reunited with the ultimate reality. So all these other gods, they're like, I guess they're just other manifestations. So someone told me yesterday literally that like they believe like everything is God kind of thing, which is why it's legitimate to worship like anything, because in a sense you're worshipping God.
I was going to say, in regards to that last bit, so it's kind of, you're talking about pantheism in a sense, right? This is a kind of everything is God.
As from what I saw, anyways, they don't use the term pantheism
Right,
to refer
right,
to
okay.
it, because I think, anyways, that they're somewhat willing to endure that contradiction in a sense. So when you're worshipping these things, you're not worshipping God, but you're worshipping like things that kind of point towards Him, but they are Him, but they're not Him at the same time, kind of thing.
It's probably important to point out as well, like they're sort of anti-Aristotelian logic,
Right.
so they don't
Yeah.
think that, you know, that like the typical understanding of like contradictions apply to this higher divinity, and so they wouldn't. They'd sort of throw Aristotelian logic out the window and say that this just complicates things and makes it hard to comprehend.
Do they distinguish between Brahman and Brahma?
Yeah.
What's the distinction? Yeah. Ahmed, tell us what's the distinction between the two things?
So I'll tell you something interesting that Prince Mohammed Hijab, the Mughal prince, wrote in his book Majma al-Bahrain. He said that if you look at, in Islam, we have Jibreel, Mikael, and Israfil. He says these are the three angels. And then he says in Hinduism, you have the three gods of Vishnu, Shiva, and Brahma. And he says that the angels in Islam are almost identical in their qualities and in their jobs as these three. So he says that Brahma is known as, he's like the main deity of Brahman. He is the one who's kind of the creator. So Dara Shukr says that Jibreel is like the main angel of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says that Vishnu is known as the preserver. He's known as the sustainer of the world and the one who's responsible for ensuring everything is occurring. And when we look at Mikael, he is one of the greatest angels, and he is responsible for the pouring of rain, the blowing of the winds, natural events such as the ordering of seasons and the management of supplications. So Mikael is very similar to Vishnu in that both of them are responsible with preserving the world. And lastly, we have Shiva, who is known as the god of destruction, and we have Israfil, who is the angel of destruction, the one who blows the horn and destroys everything. So it seems that what he's trying to indicate is that the Brahmans, the priest class, their understanding of the three quote-unquote gods of Brahma, Shiva, and Vishnu are very similar to God's angels. And so he's trying to make the argument that they're not necessarily God, but that they're just fulfilling the jobs of God. So I think in relation to that, it's an important distinction. And Brahman and Brahma are different. Brahman, it really depends who you ask. So if you ask the educated elite of the Hindus, they will tell you that there's one God and that everything else is really just a manifestation of the quality of God. So for example, Al-Biruni has his book, his Kitab al-Hind, and he has a beautiful passage, just a short passage I want to read, which beautifully answers this subject. He says that the educated among the Hindus abhor anthropomorphism of this kind, but the crowd and the members of the single sect use them most extensively. They go even beyond all we have mentioned, so as to speak of wife, son, water, or all of these things in connection with God. They are even so little pious, and when speaking of these things, they don't even abstain from silly and unbecoming language. However, I think this is an important point. He says, however, nobody minds these classes. Nobody pays attention to these people and their theories, although they are numerous and widespread. The main and most essential point of the Hindu world of thought is that which the Brahmans think. so the educated, the elite believe, or they are specially trained for preserving and maintaining their religion. And this is what is the belief of the Brahmans. So what he's essentially saying is you'll find among the uneducated, illiterate people that they'll be worshipping all of these idols. You'll think that all of these idols are manifestations of God. But he says when you look into the Upanishads, if we have time inshallah, we can go into the Upanishads, look at the commentaries, you can see that the educated elite don't believe that all of these is really God. That all of them are really just a manifestation of, we can say, like the Qudra, the power of Rahman. So I think that's an interesting point to mention.
All right, that is an interesting point to mention. Everyone heard what he said, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. What I was going to say in regards to this is I think these keywords need to be kind of delineated because they're very close words and sometimes we can equivocate quite easily. So the Brahman, is this the God, yeah, that they believe in? Brahma, Brahma is the God that they believe in.
Yeah.
Brahman is the priestly class, correct?
Yeah, the class
So
system.
again,
And this is the third one as well.
And it's who else?
The third one is the ultimate reality, Brahman.
Brahman.
Yeah, I think so. Is it Brahman, right?
Is it a different ending?
Let me check.
Is it Brahman? Yep. Ahmad, yep.
Okay. So Brahman is used in two senses. One, it's used to refer to the ultimate being, the ultimate ilah.
Yeah. Brahman, yeah?
Brahman with the N.
Okay, yeah.
Okay? But another meaning of Brahman is also the priest class. The
Ah.
educated, the ulama.
Ah. That's good. All right, so this is where you got the class, they're the highest class, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So Brahman can either be we're talking about the ultimate reality, or it's talking about the priestly class, and Brahma is the creator of the universe.
Yes.
I don't know if that's like
Is there a distinguishment between a distinguishment between Brahman and Brahmin?
Brahmin is a priest class.
Can I ask a question about the priest class?
Yeah, one of the people who want to ask a question about the priest class, if anyone can, we can discuss it.
So you refer to them as like the ulama. Are they? Can anyone become a Brahmin? You know, one of the quote unquote Hindu ulama, or is it an ethnic class?
Good. So he's asking whether Brahman are an ethnic group from anyone's readings, or whether they are a class which you can, through meritocracy, become.
Through efforts and research and learning, do you become a Brahmin?
Historically, with the subcontinent, you were born into one of these four classes, whether it was the Brahmin, the Kshatriya, or the Shudra. These are the four classes. You have the priest class, you have the military class, the mercantile class, the servant class. And historically, you were born into one of these, and you couldn't really move up. But I think, I'm not too sure, but I think in a sense, in the modern world, because India is starting to move away from the caste system, one is probably able to move up to the level of Brahmin. But I would need to look into that.
Yeah.
On Dawah-wise, they had an Indian gentleman on, and they asked him this exact question.
Right.
And he mentioned that once upon a time, that this was fluid, that people could go into the priestly class, and they could become fighters,
Yep.
and they could go to the other. But because of family systems, these became rigid over time, and now you can't go from one class to the other. So the lower class can't progress to the priestly class.
All right. So just to let you know what was said here, one of our colleagues here said that basically one individual who was kind of like an advocate for Hinduism, who has had a recent discussion with one of our apologists, if you want to call it that, in the UK, he basically described the opposite state of affairs. So he was saying that it was the opposite. It was that it was more fluid before, but now it's more rigid. It's more difficult. Yeah.
Was there any time?
Maybe.
All right. Is there anything else that anyone wants to say on God? Yeah, on the gods of the Hindus before.
It was closely connected to this.
Yeah, or anything. Yeah,
Yeah,
closely connected.
Because I was
yeah.
looking a bit at the stuff of like reincarnation. So
Yeah.
The idea of with like the castes that where you're set into. So we mentioned the four castes that you have. The idea was that I guess this is if what this other gentleman was saying is true, that's it's somewhere between these two periods. Once the idea developed that these classes became more rigid, the idea was that if the way you could move up a caste was to serve basically well within your own caste during your life. Just that when you reincarnated, you would hope that you reincarnate into a higher caste. So if you die and you're reborn into a higher caste. So it's like it's technically you do get to move up, but it's happening outside of your life.
I see.
No, but this guy was kind of clear about that, because when the brothers Mansour was pressing him regarding, why is it so rigid and why can't, why do you treat people in such a way? He said once upon a time it wasn't like that, but over time it's become that one person can't move up a class or go down a class or something like that.
After death?
I don't know about after death, but this was while they were,
Okay. Let's move on to the next category, unless there's anything. Yep. Ahmed.
Just very important to mention.
Yep.
So when we talk about Brahman in Hindu philosophy, they mean either two things.
Yep.
They mean either Saguna Brahman or Nirguna Brahman. These concepts they're not mutually exclusive, but they represent.
What are they?
So it's called Saguna Brahman, so Saguna Brahman, and then you have Nirguna Brahman, so that's Nirguna. This is how the Hindu philosophers like to explain Brahman.
What did you know? Can you translate those for us, or?
Well, I'm going to explain what they are.
Oh, okay, fine. Yeah, yep.
So these are very important concepts. So Nirguna Brahman, okay, it refers to the concept that Brahman is beyond time and space. It's the idea that Brahman has no particular form and he's present everywhere. It allows Hindus to focus on Brahman's eternal qualities rather than getting distracted by the different names and the forms. So
Nigora Brahman. How'd you say again? Sorry.
You want me to repeat that again?
No, just the pronunciation of that category. Is it Nigora Brahman?
Nirguna, yeah.
Nirguna.
N-I-R,
Okay.
Nirguna.
Nirguna Brahman. Okay.
So, we're going to get to the scriptures later, inshallah, but in the Upanishads, one of the philosophical texts, it states that, one who knows Brahman reaches the highest level. That truth is Brahman. That Brahman is knowledge. That he is infinite. So we can go down a longer discussion on this. But the other form of Brahman, which is the one which is prevalent in today's discourse, is called Saguna Brahman.
Okay.
Now, this version of Brahman means that Brahman has a form, an identity, a purpose, and these things may vary over time. So Hindus who believe in Saguna Brahman, they see deities as a way for people to understand Brahman's vast nature. That these deities, they help Hindu worshippers to focus on an image or a statues, which they also call murti. So in other words, in Saguna Brahman, people feel that God is too abstract. And because God is abstract, because we can't picture him, it's difficult for us to worship him. And so the way we worship him is we create idols, which the idols are a representation, they're a manifestation of one of the qualities of God. And so it's easier for us to worship. So in the scriptures there's a line that says, but you cannot see me, meaning Brahman is talking, you cannot see me with your present eyes, therefore I will give you divine eyes, which is interpreted to mean I will allow you to create these idols because you don't have the capability to worship me. So when you speak to like the Hindu educated class, a lot of them focus on Nirguna Brahman. They know that Brahman is in space, time, does not have a form, does not have a child. But for those people who have trouble, right, the uneducated, they take the path of Sabian Rahman and they create idols. But the educated people know that Brahman is not an idol. So I think we can have a much longer.
No, that's good. I think that so are these people, obviously, if you believe in Sarguna Brahman, you're not going to believe in Nirguna Brahman.
So this is what I mentioned right at the beginning, is that they're not necessarily mutually exclusive.
Okay. No, but I mean in the sense that, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you believe in that God has a form and not a form at the same time, like, unless you can, how does that work? How do they do it?
You got to remember they don't necessarily hold to Aristotelian logic, so it might, like, if you do, it comes across as a contradiction, and you're like, well, you can't hold one and hold the other. They seem mutually exclusive. But if they're willing to throw that kind of logic out the window, then they would hold that it'd be possible to.
Is that correct then? Brother Yusuf here said that they don't really take the Greek logical principles or Aristotelian logic, so it's conceived. They do.
They do. Yeah, Hindu philosophy is highly influenced by Aristotelian metaphysics. For example, they believe that the idea in Hinduism is that the universe is eternal. It's always existed. And this is something they really took from Aristotle's idea. But the way they explain these two, how they can be, not everybody believes that. Some people believe they are mutually exclusive, but other people believe that there can be a reconciliation in the sense that Brahman or God does not have a form, does not have an image, but that they see, whenever they see an object, they see that God is the one who is creating it and sustaining it. But it's not necessarily God.
So these are not sects. These are understandings.
These are understandings.
Okay. I think what we should do now is we should have a break and pray. We're going to pray Aisha now, just because we'll go into different categories and other categories. You can stay on the line, Ahmed, if you like. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome back. We just had a short break, but in that we had some discussions, actually, which should have been filmed, one could say. What we're going to move on to now is a very important aspect, and I think, to be fair, and I have spoken to many Hindus, despite my lack of knowledge on the subject, this is one of the main things that comes up. It's a recurring theme, no pun intended, which is reincarnation. Reincarnation itself, right? So, who has the presentation for reincarnation? Oh, he's not in today, right? Oh, okay, right. And
I've looked peripherally at it.
Okay, yeah. Anyone who has anything to say about reincarnation? Yeah.
So this is basically, first and foremost, the human soul. Hindus believe is like it's a part of the Brahman. So this is goes back to what I was talking about, this process of creation.
Yeah.
Where he becomes sort of materially manifest in the world. So creation is a material manifestation of the Brahman. So the human soul is that which is real. So for them, anything which is real is that which doesn't like perish, like its fundamental components don't come apart. So the human body, when it dies and it perishes, it gets eaten up by the earth, or like anything that you can burn and it kind of decomposes or whatever, it's not really real reality. The only real reality is that which comes from that which is like the Brahman. So that's the human soul. So when you die, you reincarnate, as in you come back into the world, you take on a new body and you live your life again. The purpose of life being to work and take on this sort of spiritual progression, and so as you get closer to the Brahman, and so if you achieve that unity with him at the moksha, then you no longer have to like come back into the world. That soul aspect I was talking about is, they call it, I think the term is Atman, which is a piece of the Brahman. And so you can ascend through levels. So if you're in a lower caste, then you kind of have to work your way up, because the castes, as I understand it, initially when they came about, it was like they represent different parts of the Brahman. So like the head of the Brahman is like the priests and the teachers, and then the warriors and rulers come from the arms, and then the farmers, the traders, and the merchants, they come from the thighs, and then the laborers come from like the feet, and then there's a caste that's even lower than that, which are like the Dalits, the outcasts. Those are like the street sweepers, the latrine cleaners, those type of people. So you ascend through the castes, and then I guess the idea is that once you get to the top of the mountain, you kind of move up into the unity with the God. So you become like finally reunited with the
Oh, so is
ultimate being.
so what you're saying
So
is that
after that, you no longer need to be reincarnated.
are you sure they say this? I mean, is it because the question of birth and rebirth, it's a cycle, right?
Yeah, samsara.
And do they? And I'll open this to the floor. Do they have an end to that, or is it just a cycle?
It can end with that sort of being reunited with the highest divinity.
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily have to. I guess someone could technically be just stuck in that cycle forever.
Yeah.
And if they're a bad person, for example, they're not going to go up. They're going to keep going to lower levels or staying on the same level. They might go up and then down again, and it could fluctuate.
So it can end.
I don't know if you.
Sorry, Ahmed. We're talking about reincarnation. The question I had was the cycle of birth and rebirth. Do they see that as continual, or is there some end point for them where they see that it can end somewhere?
There is an end point, and that end point is called moksha. So they believe that there's this spiritual journey that a person has to go on, and until they fulfill that journey, they'll be stuck in the cycle of reincarnation, right? So the idea of karma is if you lived a bad life, an unethical, unspiritual life in this life, in the next life maybe you're handicapped, or maybe you're a difficult position. But once a person breaks into that cycle, when one reaches that state of moksha, what they call this non-dualistic mystical union with God, then one becomes essentially one with God, and the cycle ends.
Okay.
And that's the ultimate goal.
Yeah. I mean, just on this point, I think for my purposes, there are lots of things I've heard. Moksha and nirvana, I know they might sound like, there is a flesh that joins those two concepts. And nirvana is in a meditative state where you reach a certain apex of spirituality. I don't know, so what's the difference between nirvana and moksha?
Nirvana is, moksha is their end goal. Nirvana it's a concept that's like largely from Buddhism, but again, it does make its way into Hinduism. It's in Buddhism, I know that it's like the last goal, right? Because there are like these stages that the soul goes on. So like in Buddhism, it's one of the last goals, but in Hinduism, moksha is like when you've completed the cycle.
So what is the status, the ontological status of the human soul at that point of moksha? Is it reincarnated? Has it been subsumed?
They say it's the raindrop that goes into the ocean.
Say that again, sorry?
It's like the raindrop that goes into the ocean and it becomes one. So there's
Is
no
that what you were
really
saying as well? Oh, okay, so it's merged. Okay. But what would make that? How would that be any different from their initial pantheistic conception then? Because don't they say that everything is already mixed with the Supreme?
Is someone speaking or no?
Yeah, no. That was the question.
Oh, again, it really depends which Hindus you're speaking to, right? Because if you're speaking to the educated class, they will say that we are not necessarily God. We are not Brahman, right? They don't really believe in pantheism. It's more of some people say monism, the idea it's one substance. But the idea is that Brahman is not within me. The Brahman is the one sustaining me, who is the one creating me and nourishing me at every moment. But I'm not necessarily Brahman. But when I reach the level of moksha, then I become one with Brahman.
Okay, what were you before? You were one with Brahman.
That's the end goal. But right now, it's just, again, you will find certain strands of Hinduism, largely among the uneducated class, that will believe that they are Brahman, that this table is Brahman. But this is why, Hinduism, again, it's such a diverse religion. There's so many different strands to it. Some will say this, others will say that, we are part of it. But the idea is that there's no more body anymore. That my entire body is submerged within Brahman. That's what some of them believe.
So this begs some questions then.
Pardon?
It begs some questions. So like, because they believe in a sort of an infinite universe, don't they? That it goes on eternally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, the question arises then, if like, does everything, could there be an end? Like, could there be a point where everything merges back with Brahman? And if not, where does everyone begin? Because obviously, if there's an end to it, like
So where does so the question of where does reincarnation begin? I mean, how does it begin?
So this is there's a good text. I think it's by Professor Arvind Sharma. I think it's the Oxford Hindu thought book on it. So he has a chapter on the Nirguna and Saguna, which he delves very deep into. It's very philosophical. I wasn't able to understand all of it. But the idea within Hinduism is that there are essentially three things which are eternal. One, Brahman is eternal. Number two, the universe is eternal. And number three, Atman, the soul, is also eternal. Now, they do make a difference between the eternality of Brahman compared to the eternality of the other two, which I'll probably have to go back and revisit. But it's something that it's a very philosophical concept, and I haven't properly understood it. But they believe these three are eternal, and they have some way of trying to submerge it. So when they say the soul is eternal, and they have a whole science on this, and that it becomes, at moksha becomes one with Brahman, there are some debates. Is the essence of the soul still there, or is it completely gone? And so does it lose its eternality? So that's not something I have the answer for.
No problem. I just have another question, and I don't know if anyone has an answer to it. And this might sound like a very basic question, but let's assume that reincarnation's happening. A human being acts in a very pathetic and unethical way, and therefore in his or her next life it becomes an ant, or it becomes bacteria or something. I don't know if bacteria is part of the reincarnation thing.
any life, I guess, would be.
Okay, right, so it becomes that. Now what does that animal have to do to get a promotion, if you like? This is my question. What does the animal have to do in order to get a promotion? Does anyone know what the animal has to do?
I guess it would have to do something virtuous. But then, like, how, what could a worm do, for example? How can a worm be virtuous?
Well, I don't know. This is my question. Like, animals.
So they also believe every animal has moral agency as well.
They believe that, right?
Oh, they have
Do they believe that?
I'm not sure. They have to, right?
Yeah. So
yeah, surely if you're demoted to the status of a worm or a maggot or something, like, the only way you could really transcend that would be by some form of act, or that would be considered virtuous in one way.
There's a hierarchy that you go through, like worm, slug, and keep moving up until you get to some kind of sentient animal. Some.
yeah,
Animal.
but how do they move up from the
Yeah, how do they
non-sentient
move up?
ones?
And also, what's like the lowest form?
Yeah. Okay. These are questions. I'm not sure if anyone, so the questions we have now. What is the animal hierarchy?
Yeah.
Like if you were to get a choice, and I don't want to sound facetious here, like, what would you choose to be, a bear or an ape or gorilla or something, like,
Yeah, it's probably that's.
Like,
I reckon probably quite, because it's not
if
just
it was like, for me, I'd probably rather be a bear, because if a bear and a gorilla had a fight, the bear would win.
But it's not just about animals.
Pardon?
I said you're not able to choose. Can I be a bear or an ape? It's just
No,
given to you.
but what I'm saying is, like, what makes the bear or the ape, like, are we looking at this in evolutionary terms?
No.
Because the bear is much more powerful than an ape.
It's not just about, because you can't just think of there being a clear distinction between one species and another. Because you might have a bear that lives in some circus in Russia that lives a really crappy life, and you might have some cat that has like a really good life in some.
What's a good
palace.
life for an animal? Like,
Well, not
no,
going
because
through
these
severe amounts of
animals
pain
in
or-
captivity live much longer than they do in the wild.
Depends, because obviously, like, fair enough if they're treated well and they're looked after, they do. They, you know, if they're getting healthcare and etc.
But they're not living that life. They're not living the wild life.
Yeah, but
Do you
this
know
is
what I'm
gonna
talking about?
but this is gonna go onto a tangent into something unrelated.
The categorization is not based on a species, but based on the quality of life that you will live. Yeah, that's what I was
You
trying to
can have a
make.
really good
Oh,
life
okay.
as an ape, but you can also have a really crappy life as an ape. And you might want to classify, like for example, like I don't know, a rat. Yeah, you might consider rat as lower in the species, but there might be a rat that has like a really comfortable life filled with pleasure, and it's like the king of the rat.
How
That's
does
the
it?
question. What is the good life for the rat? I mean, that's
Exactly.
basically what he's asking.
Well, it's
Yeah.
the king of the rats. It gets what it wants when it wants.
But rats act in a very predictable way, and so
it's
do,
pleasure versus pain type of thing. I mean, is that what you're saying?
Well, it's to do with, not necessarily. It's to do with just quality, but Allahu Alam, like, I don't know. It's a
But no,
weird-
what the thing is, this question of whether an animal has moral agency and sentience and all these kind of things. But most of these animals in the wild, they have a very predictable set of behaviors. And what is even considered moral, like for an animal, would not necessarily be considered moral for a human being. So is it one fixed morality that's working with animals and human beings? Or is it that for each animal there is a relative morality? Do you see the point? And
yeah, I guess they would understand it in some like there has to be some sort of virtue, which is what causes you to either go up or down in this hierarchy of life. We'll say we don't necessarily have access to that because we've just opened it up now as quite a complex subject that you can't necessarily just make a distinction between species and say that the rat is below the monkey because
Yes.
the monkey might live in terrible conditions and the rat might also live in terrible conditions, but it could also live in a better condition. So I don't think the distinction is by species.
I get you. I think, you know, we do have to be careful with Hinduism. I'll tell you why, right? We've covered already two categories, which have been the gods and have been reincarnation. And a lot of it may seem incredulous to many of us because we're outside of that particular faith group. But to be honest, reincarnation in and of itself is not an irrational thing. Like for us to believe that a soul can be transplanted from one human body to what's the word?
Transmigrated.
Transmigrate the soul of the human being to an animal's or whatever. It's the irrational part for me is what I've just mentioned. I haven't got an answer to this yet. Like, what is morality for a lion? Is it a murderous animal? Because all lions are murderous in that sense because they're predatorial. So there's these issues here. Like, how does what is a hierarchy for an animal? How does an animal promote itself to another animal? How does it promote itself to human being status? You know, and so on. And within human beings, how does that work either? And it can actually lead to fatalism and as well because you are disabled, you are this or that, or you are this class or this caste because you had a very poor prior life, or indeed, correct me if I'm wrong, it could be because you had a bad life. You're doing bad things because the idea of karma and reincarnation are very much connected, right? Yeah. So karma is like you're doing bad things in this world, so you get bad back in this world, and it could be in the next world, but it could also be in this world. So what that could lead to is blaming people. Something happens to someone, and so that happened to them because they were, you know, because they had it coming, basically.
I came across that a lot when I was traveling. You would see a lot of people, they would like be begging and that because they had some sort of problem. And when we were with the locals, they would often explain that as they did something bad in their previous life. And things like that.
Yeah, and that's for us as Muslims. It's not always a bad explanation, but for us it's one of many explanations. Could be that you are being punished. Could be that you're being tested. Could be that tested. It could be that your sins are being alleviated. But if that's the only mechanism that they have, so it can lead to fatalism because you are being dealt with in this way because you had acted this way in the previous life that you lived as an ant or whatever it was.
But they all,
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
they also use this to justify or to answer theodicy, right? The problem of evil. So when people say why is this child in this place being bombed and stuff, they'll say, well, it's because in the previous life they were a horrible person, and that's why they're put in this situation.
All right, right. So we would then have a secondary problem with that then. وَلَا تَزِرُ وَزِرَةٌ وِزْرُ أُخْرَى, as the Quran states, that one soul should not be punished for what another soul does. And this is something which seems to be concurrent with Christianity and Hinduism then. Because it's like original sin on steroids. That's basically what this is.
I think they're saying the girl is punished for the sins that she did in the previous life.
Yeah, it's not someone else's.
No, but all right, but it's.
So there'd be a bit of a distinction there.
But you are a different form. You are a different person. You're a different self, and then you are an ant.
Yeah,
You're the same soul.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it's better than the Christian tradition.
Yeah.
It's a bit more consistent, I guess. Because with the Christian tradition, it's one person's being literally one soul is being dealt with by another soul's actions. It's a good point.
There's also problems that arise from it, because I have noticed that it affects empathy. Like, people don't have empathy for someone who's suffering in this life. Like they don't, like,
Or
for example,
even.
yeah. So if, like, for example, if we see someone that's going through something, we might look at them with empathy, and we might have compassion and want to help them or something. But I did experience, and it's not to say that it's going to be consistent throughout everyone that comes from these kind of cultures, but they would see someone that was disabled, and they would look at them in a bad way because they considered them, or they must have been bad people. So it's not just empathy; it can give rise to a sort of hatred in some ways.
Well, that's these are all very, very good points. That combined with the whole caste system, then you have a real recipe for disaster, I think. All right, so we have spoken about that. Now I want to move on to the next bit, which is rituals. Okay, unless anyone has anything to say about reincarnation, which I haven't covered.
Just on the animal part, it's like
Yeah.
So from what I saw, they do acknowledge that this is a problem, because obviously animals don't have more agency like that.
Oh, okay, they acknowledge that.
Because obviously reincarnation is a common thing amongst Hinduism and Buddhism. They both kind of have similar sort of idea. So some of them will say that the animal, like the way a criminal goes into jail, or lives out their sentence, and then comes out. Depending on the bad karma that you've accumulated, you go and you become an animal, and then you kind of live out your sentence however many times you have to be an animal until you've lived it out, and then you get to come back into the human realm and try again. But it's a bit far-fetched, and they don't all agree on that. So it is a problem.
Right. Okay, good. So we were definitely onto something here. Let's move on to rituals. Sorry, go ahead, Ahmed.
One thing I just wanted to briefly mention is, in Hinduism, when they talk about reincarnation, especially with these avatars, right? So for example, Krishna is a good example. Was Krishna really a god, or was Krishna a prophet, right? Because human beings, as we know with Christianity, have a tendency to deify sacred, prophets. So Krishna, for example, was a shepherd. He was somebody who was a human being, was somebody who did miracles. It was somebody who brought a sort of revelation. So even within Hindu, and we know how religions can be corrupt. So we also have to understand that Hinduism has, the idea, sometimes we ask ourselves, did Allah send a prophet to India? And I think that's the wrong question. I think the right question to ask, which obviously we won't get an answer to, is how many prophets did Allah send? Because you're looking at a massive, 4,000 or 5,000 year old religion. So some make the argument that Krishna was a prophet. Some argue that Vaishya, another one, was a prophet. So they have prophets within it. So I just thought it was an interesting point to mention.
Yeah, I mean, I can see why that could be the case, and how the religion then got corrupted. It should be noted, the major anthropological kind of thesis that is out there is that of an emergent monotheism, which Jordan Peterson kept talking about in our discussion, by the way. Well, do you know what he meant by that? He meant that, and this is the prevailing theory, that you have all these different gods, polytheistic gods, and then some force or some sociological situation happens where then that becomes like one god. So they reverse engineer it from our narrative. Our narrative is that it started off from monotheism and then polytheism emerged out of monotheism. But the dominant theory in anthropology is the opposite of that, which is that everything started off in as polytheism, and then you needed to unify the tribes, unify the people, so you created a monotheism. You see, so a lot of this is
even within that, there's a stage before the polytheism, which is animism, right? The idea that everything contains spirit. So there's a spirit in this table, there's a spirit in the tree. And then, like Karen Armstrong's book, A History of God, she says, then they took the souls, the spirits out of them and put it into the idols. And then she said people started worshipping the idols. And then they claimed that when Ibrahim alayhi salam came, he was kind of the founder of monotheism. And as Judaism, Christianity, and Islam spread, they destroyed all the polytheism, which is a natural state, and then they established monotheism.
Does she believe that Abraham actually existed? Does she say that?
Well, that's part of their theory. They don't really have a proper explanation. They're just, for example, if you read someone like Wilhelm Schmidt, who was a Christian in the 20th century, and he wrote 12 volumes on this thesis that every civilization was monotheistic originally, but when the tribes got together, each of them bringing their own gods, each of them saying that their gods had different names, that's how you get polytheism. But monotheism, he argued in 12 volumes, is the dominant, that's the basis of a society. And if you go to any tribal society, right, even today, which has no contact with any human civilization, you'll find...
What was the name of that person? Schmidt.
Wilhelm.
Okay.
Wilhelm.
Yeah.
And then last name Schmidt. I think it's Schmidt. Unfortunately, most of his works are in German, but there are some translations in English.
Excellent. That's a very good point. Thank you for mentioning it. Yeah, of course.
So this notion that polytheism was primary and then monotheism came after it, it's sort of the result of the empirical predicament. They're looking, like, for example, say we're right, which I think we are, and the original primary religion was monotheistic, and it was anti-idol. What sort of empirical evidence are you expecting to find, other than like buildings of worship, which are going to be almost indistinguishable from just places of living? You're just going to have like maybe some ruins of a building, but there's nothing to identify as a anti-idol monotheistic people.
Right, yeah, it's a very good point. That's a very good point.
And so if they're like, right, what evidence do we have to make an inference? Obviously, when you sort of move from this original primary monotheistic religion, which is anti-idol and focuses on the worship of something transcendent, you're not going to have empirical evidence for that. But when they move away from that and start practicing the different forms of shirk, and they start producing idols, then of course it's at that point you're going to start having empirical evidence. And so if their sort of epistemology is primarily empirical, then it makes sense that they might make this mistake.
I see the point, and also from our perspective, the Quran comments that the majority of people are mushriks anyway, that they are in that category. So sometimes it's now you're looking at the wealth of evidence. They may think, well, how comes you have so many polytheistic cultures? You have polytheistic cultures because they diverted from the monotheistic religion, even though that might now become the dominant demographic in world history. But that might be confused, and we believe it has been, because it's almost impossible, like strictly from a historical perspective, to make a case for or against, because all you're looking at is correlations. But the moment you say, well, it started from this and then became that, it's very, very, very difficult.
This touches on what we were talking about before, where there was the mention of that there's a possibility of the seed of that monotheistic religion being found in, say, Hinduism. And the brother was making the references to how certain gods in Hinduism could have been originally, say, like the angels. And that makes sense, because even like from our perspective, we do believe that every people came from Adam alayhi salam, and so that each of them should have the seeds of that original religion. They should have the seeds of their origins
Yep.
present in that. And
I see the point. I mean, for sure, it's not inconceivable at all to think that there's been some corruption that's taken place and that was originally monotheistic.
And we can also understand why that would occur. So, like, you only need to look at like accents and language in England, for example. Like how we were speaking about this the other day as well. How much it varies over time and how it can develop. Now, if you imagine a world that was completely disconnected back in the day, where the world is vast and it's not as populated, and you have a group of people, and they begin with the same religion or the same culture, and as they get bigger, tensions arise, and they're split. And so one people go in one direction, and the other go in another. And as time develops, their original language would also develop and change. And so what they used to share would become independent or different in the way they express it. So they might have the same word when they were together for God. But then as they move separately, centuries pass, as multiple generations have passed and people have been born and died, etc. And their languages have changed. If they were to ever meet again, they would have very different ways of expressing what would have been the same thing. And that might cause confusion if they've not necessarily recorded that history perfectly. Or if, there's all sorts of things. If you imagine life back then, it could have been quite chaotic. You're just focused on survival. You've got all sorts of things kicking off. You've got tigers trying to eat your face. And so, recording history might not necessarily have been a primary concern for them. Survival might have been. And so it makes sense that they would maybe have this different way of expressing the same thing, but then upon meeting each other again many centuries later, that they might distinguish that as something separate. So if one person's referring to God in one way, and the other person's referring to it in another way, and then you've had sort of like additions creatively as people have developed independently, and they've added things. That adding isn't going to be identical. And so then when they meet each other, it's going to be like, well, no, my God's the real God, and because they've sort of got that from the original root, and then the other people are going to say the same thing, and then it would make sense that at some point that would maybe give rise to a conflict, and then you have the rise of multiple gods, and then you would see polytheism begin to develop from that. And we've got examples of how the Romans added, even the Hindus. He mentioned Buddha. The Buddhism was the original Buddha, the prince Siddhartha, or whatever his name was. He originated in India. Buddhism developed as a religion, and then the Hindus added him into their pantheon. So the Buddha became a Hindu god as well.
Point here.
And even you find even some Hindus, they'll add Jesus alayhi salam to their pantheon.
They only do that with Guru Nanak, though. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, but the point is mainly like, and then the Romans, when they would conquer a people, they would try to incorporate that people's
Their
gods
gods
into their own religion as well.
So you can see the additions coming.
And you can see how you can see why, if there was, as what we say, a pure monotheistic tradition at root, how that could develop into polytheism. And it makes sense as well. Like if I'm gonna start a story, or if I'm gonna write something, I'm gonna begin with one character. You have to begin somewhere, and you have to begin with one. You can't, if you're going to create a polytheistic religion, you can't just start with 50 gods. And if you follow all of their sort of family trees, they all do go back to this sort of one mysterious creative force. And and so even then you can see the origins of some possible monotheism within each of the polytheistic religions.
All right, that's very, very... syncretism, religious syncretism.
Yeah, I just wanted to say
Yep.
it's not inconceivable from a Muslim perspective. We have the example in the Quran of Musa and Harun, where you had two messengers at the same time that were sent to the Jews, and they were worshiping a golden calf when Musa left for a short period of time. So you didn't even need like centuries of development and interaction between different cultures. You had two messengers of God, peace be upon both of them, that were sent to a particular people at the same time. One left and the other one was still there, and they still went astray worshiping false gods. So I mean, I know it's from a Muslim perspective, but from our perspective, there's nothing really hard to imagine about it.
And that's really powerful example, in fact. And now that you've said that, it makes me think of another, which is the gods that were being worshipped at the time of Noah. وقالوا لا تذرن آلهتكم ولا تذرن ودا ولا سواعا ولا يغوث ويعوق ونسرا. These three gods that the people of Noah used to worship. يغوث ويعوق ونسرا. Some mufassirs, like they say about it, that it's talking about they were originally good men in the community that did wonderful works and so on. And then the statues had been made in their name or in their image, and then people started worshipping them like gods.
Yes, it happened in. So I'd stayed in temples in Korea.
Yeah.
And they did that. It was a new temple. It's called Gwinza Temple, and they just built it in the mountain area. And the person that made it, he only died 50 years or so years ago. Like, it's not even been a century. And they made a big gold statue out of him, and they worship, funnily enough, similar to how the Muslims, like they prostrate. They do it 5 odd times a day.
No way.
And but they do it to these big gold statues.
Subhanallah. Well,
Of these men that lived not long ago.
We'll come to this maybe near like I said, the tail end of the discussion. But it seems like the way to do dawah to Hindus is already the outline and the blueprint is already given in the Quran. Like all those very basic questions about asking them to recognize that this la yadurrukum wa la yanfa'ukum, this statue does not benefit you, does not harm you. You know, just going back to bare bone basics. But we have one thing more to cover today, which is rituals.
Can I just comment on this last section?
Of course, yeah.
So it's interesting that we draw a parallel between Nuh alayhi salam and Hinduism. One of the interesting things that you'll find is that the story of the flood is something which is foundational in Hinduism.
Oh, really? Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah.
So tell us about that then, the story of the flood in Hinduism.
Well, the story of the flood is found everywhere. Everywhere you go, you'll find it. Even here in California, in Vancouver, the indigenous people believe in the flood. They believe that's how they got here. So the flood is very well known through multiple evidences. But in Hinduism, their calendar also has a relationship with the flood. But I once read a paper. Somebody argued that Nuh alayhi salam was the prophet that was sent to India. And so they cited some of these verses, but they mentioned a hadith which I thought was quite interesting, which is that on the day of judgment, Nuh alayhi salam shows up with his people. Nuh alayhi salam shows up, and I'm paraphrasing. We can look into it, but his people don't recognize him. And Hinduism is the only world religion that I can think of that does not have a founder. It's something which is quite. You look at Buddhism, Sikhism.
Yeah, but I don't know if the haml of the hadith, because his people were the mu'mins, the believers, and the Hindus are clearly mushriks. So I don't know if I would connect the two.
The original, like the original people that he came with, those people wouldn't even recognize. It's just an argument out there. But
what was the link they made with like the gods that are mentioned in the Quran at the time of Noah?
I'm not sure.
Was there any?
First time
okay.
from you. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. No. Interesting. I do think that there could be some very interesting overlap.
Another thing also, you mentioned like the three gods. The words given to them are probably the Arabic names for them. So I wonder if could those be the Hindu gods, Vishnu?
But
Brahma,
these words, Yaghuth wa Nasra and all that, they're not Arabic words.
Okay.
Yeah, they're not Arabic words.
I've seen. I think in some of the commentaries, some argue that the Sapiens were. A lot of them argue that they were from like Iraq, Mesopotamia. But I read some that said that it could possibly be Hinduism as well, a reference to.
Allahu Alam. These are very interesting things to think about.
I wanted to ask as well. So, do the Hindu gods have some sort of dependency upon the worship of their followers? Like, do they become stronger or weaker?
Do the Hindu gods become stronger or weaker depending on who follows them? I mean, we see this kind of, like, this might link into rituals actually, because one thing I was exposed to when I went to one of the temples in West London, you know, I went in there one time to see what they were doing. And you know, there's one of these people dancing and stuff like that. They actually had segregation. I was quite surprised. They had men and women segregated, which I was quite surprised. But anyways, I went in and they looked at me quite strangely, not because of, maybe it's because of the sheer size of me, but I was hoping that they don't jump into some kind of a prostration or anything like that.
Explain that their gods need this worship and that they become weak. And I've seen the same sort of thing referenced in even things like, you know, Viking mythology, where if the gods are not being worshipped, they lose power.
Is that what they believe? I mean,
I can't remember. I have heard people say that, but I couldn't give references.
Okay. What about this? I mean, okay, I'll give you some controversial ones. It stopped at the time of the British Empire, but they had this practice, sati, which was women would burn themselves when, you know, literally kill themselves through burning when their husbands died. I'm not going to comment about, you know, the social aspects of ethical, non-ethical. It's their business. I mean, you can make a liberal argument for it. A woman who wants to burn herself is just like euthanasia. Yeah, I'm sure you can make a really legal argument for it. Should the British government have intervened, well, in as much the same way as maybe they should for euthanasia? I don't know. You can make an argument for these things or against these things. You can say maybe some will say, no, the British government were right to do that because this is a horrible practice. Away from that discussion, does this practice of sati have any precedent in the books of the Hindus, or is it just a tradition that was passed down? Where does it have its genesis? Where this practice? Where does it? From whence did it come? Yeah.
Yeah. So, what I know, there's a myth to do with the god Shiva. So, if I remember correctly, I think this is his wife. Basically, his father-in-law, so the father of his wife, basically despised him.
Say that again. Sorry.
So,
yeah.
So Shiva is the god. His father-in-law. So
is
his
it Shiva's a female or male?
No, Shiva's the man.
Okay.
So his father-in-law, his wife's husband, despised him.
Wife's father.
Sorry, stop. Yeah, so his wife's father despised him.
This doesn't seem like a myth at all. This seems like the truth.
Reality.
This seems like it's talking about a real life story. Go ahead.
So obviously this put the wife in a very sort of tumultuous position. She wants her dad to like her husband. The dad is not getting on board.
Absolutely.
You know,
Yeah.
of course, a lot of maybe sisters know what this is like. But eventually, she in sort of like a protest, she burned herself.
Wow.
And while she's burning herself, she prayed that, I guess, she comes back as his husband. If I remember correctly, I had it here.
Wow.
So yeah.
I have to say, with all the I'm against this practice. We're against this practice as Muslims, but you have to say that, you know, this woman really has some serious loyalty for the man. I mean, we're talking about polygamy here and all these kind of things. It's still burning herself to death. This is a different level altogether.
You could also look at it as a disloyalty to her father.
Yes, but we're talking about the husband here for a second. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, bro. You're in the middle.
Yeah. So.
Sorry?
So
She
okay.
has two forms. She has parvati.
Yeah. So what
She
it looks
really
like
loved
here,
them.
we've got the diagram. So when she makes this prayer, she dies, and then she prays to be reborn as his wife again. And so she dies and she's reborn.
This is Shiva.
This is the wife. No,
Oh,
this is the
sorry,
wife, Sati,
Shiva's wife.
Shiva's wife, her name is Sati. So
Her name is?
I've got in one place as Sati, but there's another place that says she's also goes by Parvati.
Oh,
So-
wow. So where is this book? Do you know what the source is for this?
So
It's one of their mythological books.
yeah,
It's one of their pieces of literature.
I can try to pull up the source
Okay.
in a second.
Mabarat.
Oh, the Mabharvatat. It's yeah.
You
I know the
yeah.
word, but it's
Yeah, you can put it in the group. But that's interesting that it actually has origins, because this is the mother of all women's rights discussion. I mean, It's almost gone under the carpet now. It's only because it's a historical inquiry and it's been stopped. But still, there's how many women burned themselves like this? Yeah.
So obviously, she wasn't a widow when she did it. But afterwards, like for some people, it became a sort of a sign of loyalty to a person's husband.
Wow.
That when your husband goes, you do that so that you, I guess, reincarnate to be with him again. So then obviously that afterwards all the social issues happen, whether she's being forced into it or if she's not, or if she's doing it willingly or whatever. Then
Right, okay.
But then
These
obviously
are
now they've
questions.
passed laws to kind of outlaw
Stop
it.
that.
But,
Yeah, yeah,
you know,
yeah.
you'll still hear odd cases where women will actually do that out of loyalty for their husbands
Really?
when they die. Yeah.
And how widespread was this historically, if anyone has read into that? I mean, it was a practice that was happening there for sure. I mean, do we know when it started? I mean, that's a good bath. Like, it's a really interesting and important research. We should look into that. Because that's really important. When they say, well, Islam is the only religion X, Y, Z, and then ... right? And then it talks about women's rights somehow. This is the mother of all women's rights issues here. A woman burning herself to death. Forget about stoning and decapitation. This is a woman burning herself to death for committing no crime, involving herself in no trouble, but only because her husband died.
It's only women's rights issue if she's being forced to do so.
Yes,
If she's doing it upon herself, then you could
like
argue
make
that's
the liberal case.
that is a women's right.
Yeah, for sure. I agree
she
with that.
wants
Yeah,
to
no,
do it.
you could make that argument,
I know that it's a
and
good
for sure you can
argument.
make a liberal argument for that. You can make a feminist argument for
Yeah.
that. Just in the same way as you can do the same thing for any kind of anything that a Muslim woman would do as well.
Because if you're trying to stop that, that could be framed as oppressive.
Yeah.
The man's trying to tell the woman what to
do,
and
yeah.
blah, blah, blah.
But where you stand on issues to do with euthanasia and whether the state should allow, restrict, assist with that kind of thing, because and then the question of the social contract, and is the social contract of the state more? These are all we don't want to get in there. It's beyond the scope of what we're trying to do. But the important thing is that this is a serious ritual, really, which only stopped recently. But how many women perished in this way? Yeah, go ahead, bro.
Well, I did some. I just did some online research. It wasn't something that was widespread.
Right.
It was something that was done. So
Okay.
the fact that it was done was something that obviously it wasn't obviously sole acts. So people obviously saw this, but it wasn't that every woman when her husband died was doing it. There's probably certain, and I think it's more like a cultural taboo, but it wasn't as widespread as I think we think it might be. Because then there'd be like the population would be so small if every woman
Of
kept
course.
dying, right?
It says that initially it was a higher cost thing, so like, and then it spread to lower cost after that.
The brother said that initially it was a higher caste thing. Maybe the Brahmins were doing
It
it.
says between 15th and 18th century, they said approximately 1,000 women.
Okay, so there's one estimate here we've got from like the 15th to the 18th century, about 1,000 women did it, which is quite significant, bro. Like 1,000 women to do something like that. That's 1,000 women that have decided to burn themselves. You know, that's amazing, really. Amazing, not in the positive sense, but it's shocking. It's shocking that, to be honest, it's that human beings do that stuff. I find it shocking, to be honest. That's for me the biggest intrigue of the whole thing. That human beings would actually do that kind of thing. I find it so intriguing. You know. Anyway, moving on swiftly. Other rituals that we see. I mean, in the rivers.
There was a video
Yeah.
that was circulating where there was just they had this goat and there was this big fire, and the goat's alive, or it's a sheep or something. It's an animal, and they're sort of lifting it above their heads, and while it's still alive, they just sort of like cut it open, and then all its insides just start falling out.
What's
everywhere.
this?
It's a Hindu ritual of some sort.
Okay.
But it's basically they sacrifice an animal while it's still alive by just like hacking.
Oh, they
it
sacrifice animals
in the middle, and then there's just sort of rubbing its
entrails and stuff.
Yeah, and it's the contents of its stomach and.
Well, we see this
all
kind
over.
of, sorry to say,
And then they throw it
unhygienic
on the fire.
practices in the Ganges rivers, and it is unhygienic, and that is exactly what it is like. But what I'm wondering here, is this an Indian cultural thing, or is this something which has some basis in the religion? Do they see the river as god of some sorts, the Ganges god, or something? What's the lowdown on that one?
I'm not sure.
Do you know, Ahmed, about the Ganges stuff they do?
Yeah, they do consider the river Ganges as a sacred river.
Right, not God though, right?
No, I don't think it's a god.
Okay, not a God. Fine. And what do they do with? What are they doing in there?
So they do bathe in the river. I think that will wash away its their sins.
Really?
Yeah, that's one thing that they do. When they have like a pilgrimage, they go to a certain place which near a certain part of the Ganges River, and they bathe themselves in there. But I'm not sure about the
Have
unhygiene.
you ever been there yourself?
No. This is in India.
Oh, okay, yeah. I thought you might have been, but it is very unhygienic. Now, if you look at the videos of it, it's undoubtedly unhygienic. It's no, and they're all at the same time, and they're urinating and defecating in there.
What do we know about the poo throwing thing as well?
Yeah.
There's a festival. It's called Gora Haba. I think that's the pronunciation. But you have like, the many people come. They start with like collecting the, I guess, quote unquote ammunition. So they'll go to the houses that own cows because they believe in the holiness of cows, because of like the cows produce milk and it's seen as like a life-giving entity. So, it's I guess.
Is that why they consider it a holy cow?
There's an ethic there.
Scriptural reasons for it.
Okay, right, fine.
Yeah, because
fine.
in the Bhagavad Gita it says the cow is the mother of all things.
Yeah, they couldn't.
Okay.
And it
So
couldn't be
that's
the
why-
reason they consider it, because you can get that from goats. Cats give milk.
Yeah.
Like,
Okay, so why the cow in particular?
The scriptural reason, because the Bhagavad Gita says the cow is the mother of all things, and also it's reported that Krishna was very respectful to cows. So there's like.
Also, there's two reasons. Because
Yeah.
Krishna was respectful to cows,
Yeah.
and the cow is the mother of all things.
According to the Bhagavad Gita, yeah.
What does that mean, the mother of all things?
I have no idea.
I'm guessing it relates to some sort of origin of life.
Or maybe that's
Mm.
where we start. In
Yeah,
the
everything
reincarnation.
As a cow.
With the cow, and then it all.
Well, I mean, according to evolutionary biology, you know what family the cow is in? It's in there with the whale and the. It's in there with the whale and the sea creatures. Have you seen this? It's a bovine, isn't it? Like, but in terms of to be honest, that's like a mythology in itself. How much can you think? How many transformations need to happen for a cow to turn into a whale?
Or a whale to turn into a cow.
Sorry, a whale to turn into a cow. Yeah, like from a gill to a lung. Like, how many transformations have to continually happen? But this is a story. Like, it's honestly, it is a narrative. Yeah, sorry, but anyway, the cow is the mother of all things. That's why they. It's good. Now I know.
Jump from that to let's throw species.
So
Yeah, sorry, Ahmed. We'll come to you in a second. Just one of our guys is
There's
just
a
saying.
few
Yeah.
more things about the cow. So obviously there's scriptural basis for their sort of them valuing it, but then there's also things about it having, like I said, like it eats simple things, then it produces this milk, which is like the
But so does
foundation for life.
many of the cattle, right?
Yeah, but so you can see that they're trying to maybe tadabbur, they're trying to take for what it. I don't know. So then the idea is that anything that the cow produces is pure and potentially curing. So they collect the feces of the cow, so then they take it to this temple. This is the specific festival that I referred to earlier. The priest or some of the clergymen will come and they'll say a blessing and that type of thing. And then there's like the flinging aspect, so they'll take the feces.
They're throwing at each other.
So they'll throw it at each other. They'll like wade in it, all that kind of stuff. Like I don't want to use but that's all that process takes place. And so the belief is that there's also like curing. There's also curing health benefits. So
no,
let's say,
does this have scriptural basis? The throwing.
I don't know. Maybe I don't know if it's bid'ah. I don't know.
But maybe they're just making the inference because they've already put such a high status on the cow.
Maybe the cow has the most ammunition.
Maybe.
I mean, it's got a lot of milk.
It's got a lot of feces.
That's what I'm saying.
But I think it's probably just like an inference from they've already put it to like a really, really high status. And so now they're valuing everything that it produces. And
Yeah, is there an animal that produces more milk than a cow?
I don't know.
Maybe it's that. I don't know.
Do whales produce milk? They come from a cow. Do whales produce milk?
I
Because
don't
if they
think-
do, I can imagine that they produce a hell of a lot.
The mammals, but I don't think they produce milk. I don't think so.
I don't know.
I don't think so. No, I don't think
Allahu
so.
alam.
That's one of the
What
other
do you
things
think?
that
You don't know either.
I don't think. No, I'm not. This is not my area of.
That's a bit of
But no. But the point is the point I'm making here is a cow what I'm still struggling to understand, to connect this to a social issue, is why they, the lynchings that take place when Muslims in India, sacrifice a cow and eat it or whatever. Is that just with Muslim people, or do they do that with like Christians and Jews or anyone else?
Yeah, I can imagine it's not limited to Muslims.
So,
Yeah, go on.
well, something that's very interesting is that there's a book that this Indian professor wrote called The Myth of the Holy Cow. And it's an interesting book because what he argues in there is that beef played an important role, in the cuisine of ancient India long before, Islam even came. And he says that part of the Brahman or the Buddhist diet was eating beef. And this book, they banned it in India, but he made the argument that, Hindus historically have been eating cow. They have been eating beef. So the idea that Muslims today, because they're eating it, he says it's really because the Hindutva government has decided to persecute Muslims specifically. They began this persecution, but that historically that the Hindus used to eat cows, especially among the Brahman class. So it's an interesting point.
That is a very interesting point, and one that we should definitely think more about, because it's actually has sociological impact with the lynchings that we're seeing in India and so on. But I wanted to ask a bit more about rituals. So they have Diwali. They have these things we're aware of, Festival of Light, this kind of festival. What are the things which are staple parts of Hindu ritual that you guys have researched?
What about the powder, colourful powder throwing?
What's that?
Should I go to the presentation then?
So what's that?
So I have prepared a presentation to go through that then.
Yeah.
So like you mentioned, there's like many rituals because there are like multiple traditions. So I'll just focus on maybe the main ones.
Yes.
So categorize them into 5 categories. There's the rites of passage. There's festivals, and then there's yoga, then pilgrimages, and then charity. So the rites of passage is called sanskaras. There's like 16 milestones that you reach in your life. And when you reach out, you're supposed to approach it or acknowledge it in a certain way. So it starts with marriage, which is called like vivaha, and then you do certain things. So it differs from community to community what you do on that day and how you celebrate it.
What do you do on the day?
It's just a celebration, basically. Marriage is just a celebration. And then the second one is...
and marriage, they have polygamy, polygyny, what kind of thing?
I'm not quite certain about that.
Oh, right.
And then the second is praying for the children. It's like basically dua. So that's the second sanskara.
Pray to who?
To God.
Or whoever the God is.
Yeah.
Whichever one they want.
Somewhere I read that separate families have like separate gods.
Okay.
It's like a preference, basically.
Right.
So basically make a dua for progeny. And then the third is when the woman finds out she's pregnant, the man has to make a dish for the woman, and then they pray for the child as well. So this is also like a celebration. And then the fourth one is like basically the equivalent of baby showers in the West. So this is later in the pregnancy, the family friends get together and they celebrate that. And then there's once after the baby is born, and then when the baby is like the 10th or 11th day of the baby, and then the 3rd or 4th month there's another celebration. Then 6 months of the when the baby 6 months they have a celebration, and then the 7th month, and then when it's 1 year old, and then when it's 5 years old, that's when they're first introduced to the letters to study. This is basically the cleric class, basically the Brahman class, who's allowed to study. In the 5th year, they taught the letters, and they also they taught the letters on 5th year.
Yeah. And
then when the child is 8. They get the thread, the sacred thread that they...
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's when in the 8th year. And they also taught the Gayatri mantra. And this is basically like marking their formal entry into formal education. This is the 8th year. And then...
so they have a good educational ethic.
Sorry?
Formal education, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they...
Particular class.
Yeah, this is only for a particular class.
Oh,
only
okay.
for the people who are allowed to. Not everybody is.
Good, yeah.
So these are people who are allowed to study the Vedas, the scriptures.
Yep.
And then there's like 16 of that, and finally is when they die. Find out when they die, the body is burnt on the pyre, and then it's like other like celebrations when they die for like 13 days. So that's basically it's called the sanskara. There's 16 milestones in each and everyone's life that should be like acknowledged in a very particular manner.
Right.
And then there's the festivals. Again, almost each god and goddess have a particular festival
So why is
associated
Diwali
with them.
so popular here in the West?
Yeah, but the main ones is Diwali and Holi, because it's like associated with like the most popular ones. Diwali is associated with Rama and Sita. So there's a whole story of Sita was Rama's wife. She was kidnapped by Ravana and taken to the kingdom of Lanka, which is basically Sri Lanka, modern day Sri Lanka.
No way.
Yeah. There's also a place called Ravana's Cleft there, which I've been to.
So she went to hell. Yeah, go on.
So Rama goes there, saves Sita, and then when he's coming back, the people help them escape by lighting lamps. So that's why on Diwali they light lamps as a remembrance of that.
Really? That's
Yeah.
okay. Very interesting.
So Sita was kidnapped, Rama's wife, and Rama went to save her. When he came back, the people of the village lit lamps to help them escape. So that's why the people light lamps in remembrance of that.
Which one's Rama again? Sorry.
Rama is the 7th incarnation of Vishnu.
What does it look like?
I'm not sure.
Is that male,
I'm
female?
all confused now.
Oh, yeah.
Rama is the male. Rama is
Oh,
the male.
right, got you.
He's considered like the ideal man, the al-insan al-kamil.
It's like me.
And then the next major one is Holi.
Okay.
Holi is known as the festival of colors and celebrated during the spring. So this is done in remembrance of the victory. Hindu remembers the victory of Prahlad over the demon girl Holika. That's why they get the name Holi from. Holika was basically ordered by an evil king to slay Prahlad. It was
Who?
Prahlad. There was a guy called Prahlad.
Okay. Yeah.
His father wanted to kill him for some reason.
Oh my God.
I'm not sure why. But his father got Holika, who's an evil demon, so a demon girl, to kill his own son.
Oh my God.
But somehow Prahlad managed to kill Holika himself. And that's why they celebrate Holi. I'm not sure why they throw colored powder, but for some reason...
Who killed who at the end?
Prahlad killed Holika.
So the son kills the father?
No. The son kills the hitman, basically.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah, got you.
Yeah. And then for some reason they throw colored powder. I'm not sure why. And then there's yoga, which is also important in
Western tradition. Yeah.
Even in Hindu, basically they're trying to reach Brahman, the thing we were talking about earlier, the ultimate reality. They see yoga as a way to do that. And even in yoga, there's like many different types of yoga. There's actually like four main types. Sorry. Certain types only like particular classes do it, and there's like different kind of things that they do in each type. And then there's the pilgrimages. Again, there's many of that as well. But the main one is so one of the most sacred city is a place called Varanasi. It is believed to be the city where Shiva lived a long time ago.
Okay.
And the river Ganges runs through that as well, through that city. And they go on there and on pilgrimage and bathe there because they believe the sins will be washed away. And then the other important pilgrimage is the Kumbh Mela. I think this is the largest gathering of people in the world. Again, this is another place where...
How many people occurred there?
I'm not sure, but in the millions.
Okay.
And then this is another city where the Ganges runs through, and similar things. So they do this once every 12 years. So it's not like you can go every year.
Okay.
So once every 12 years. But there's like a minor, like a lesser form of version of that particular event where it's held like every 3 or 4 years. But the lesser form version is like done in 3 different places, and they go there once every 3 years. And this started because of the story of of a person called Garuda, which was initially a bird. Okay, the bird picked up a jar that contained immortality nectar, but 4 drops of that nectar fell into the Ganges. So that's where the Ganges basically got all its magical powers from, I guess. So that particular Kumbh Mela pilgrimage lasts for 55 days. And then they have even charity is very important for them. They call it dana. In Sri Lanka, for some reason, they call it danam. I think because they adopted the Sinhalese word. and then and then under the concept of dana comes another concept called ahimsa, which means not harming or killing anything living. I think somebody mentioned that earlier, because they believe that the like spark of divinity of the divine is in every living thing. So it's called ahimsa. So you should not harm or kill anybody. And then underneath that comes the idea of the cow being like one of the most sacred of those living things, because of like I mentioned, scriptural reason, and he mentioned some rational reasons as well.
I found
So that's about it.
What? I found why they throw the colour. So how much did you mention about the Holi festival? Did you mention the fire?
No, I didn't.
So what is the Holi festival? Holi festival is a religious and agricultural festival of fertility and harvest, according to the BBC. The centuries-old festival is celebrated on the day after the last full moon of the Hindu month Falguna. There are several religious stories attached to Holi. One of the most well-known is that Prahalad and Holika, that of Prahad and Holika. Prahad was the son of a demon king. I'm not going to try to pronounce that. Who, unhappy with his son's devotion to Vishnu, attempted and failed several times to murder Prahalad. This person's sister and a fellow demon, Holika, was gifted immunity to fire and therefore decided to carry Prahalad into the flames as one last attempt to murder. But because Holika was using her powers for evil, the gods restricted their gift and she turned to ash. Prahalad was protected from the fire by Vishnu and later took his father's throne. The moral of the story is that good always prevails over evil, and that goodness is what is celebrated in the Holi. Celebrants often light huge public bonfires on the last night of Holi to pay homage to Prahalad's story. According to nationalgeographic.org, the powdered paint, called gulal, thrown during the festival, represents the bonfire from which Prahalad was saved, and the powders used pay homage to the bright colours seen during the spring season.
Very interesting. Do you want to continue with your...
No, that's about it.
That's about it.
Oh, there's one last thing. During the Holi celebrations, the Indian caste system, the division between the different social classes, is put on the back burner, and all castes celebrate together, sharing goodwill and humour universally.
All right. Now, having said that, the last thing that we have on the menu is the scriptures. Yeah. So let's do that now. Let's get scriptures done first, and then.
The most important Hindu scriptures are the Vedas, which means knowledge in Sanskrit. It's believed these texts were written between 1500 and 1000 BCE, making them some of the oldest religious texts. They're divided into two broad categories: the Shruti, which means heard, and Smriti, which is remembered. The Shrutis, which include the Vedas, define the truth for Hindus. Hindus believed that the laws of nature and the truth of self were revealed to sages who were in the ultimate state of meditation. What they heard has been compiled in the Vedas. The Vedas are classified into four categories: Rig Veda, Yajurveda, Samved, Atara Veda. Every Veda was given to a specific sage in order to preserve and propagate them. Each Veda is made up of four parts: the Samhitas, which consists of hymns to God; the Brahmanas, which consists of priestly rituals and prayer; the Aranyakas, which concern worship and meditation; the Upanishads, which concern mystical and philosophical teachings of Hinduism and are taught under mentorship. The second category of Hindu scriptures are the Smritis, or that which is remembered. These texts elaborate and explain the Shruti scripture and were written by sages. They include Dharma Shastras. These are the primary texts of Hindu law and codes of conduct. They advise on spiritual, moral, social, and material matters. The Puranas, these explain Hindu legends, genealogy of gods and kings, cosmology, astronomy, and poetry. They address the social, religious, and moral needs of men. The Ittihas comprises of the two epic poetic narrations, the Ramayana, which describes the ideal family, society, and state, and the Mahabharata, which depicts the epic war between good and evil, justice and injustice. The Mahabharata contains the Bhagavad Gita, which is an important dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna on how to do good deeds and fight injustice. And the Darshanas are texts which expand various practical sciences. The Vedangas are 6 books which give insight into the meanings, structure, and knowledge contained in the Vedas. The Agamas or Tantra are guides to prayer, meditation, construction, and idol making.
Okay, thank you. That was very comprehensive. So these, what you said, the Vedas were the most important, right?
Yes.
And you had the Rig Vedas and the.
Yeah, you have 4. The Vedas are classified into 4 categories.
Right.
Yeah.
So Rig Vedas.
Rig Vedas, Yajurved, Samved, and Atharved.
And does anyone know? Open this to the floor. Does anyone know if there's a prioritization between those Vedas, or are they all seen as authoritative as one another?
They're
The Vedas are
classified.
all largely. Was someone else speaking?
Yeah. Go ahead, Ahmed. Yeah.
The Vedas are the it's what they would consider wahi, and they believe that, like the brothers mentioned, the 4 different Vedas, each one of them focuses on a specific aspect. So one like the Yajurveda will focus on rituals. When it comes to looking at theology, the Upanishads are kind of the philosophical texts explaining their theology about God. So I think those, for our interest, if our interest is wanting to know their understanding of God, the Upanishads would be the best text to study. And the Upanishads are filled with statements that could be interpreted as monotheism. A lot of these ideas that God does not have form, that God should not be made into images, the idea that God is one. These are all that are found within the Upanishad texts. Those are, I think that's what we should focus on if that's our goal. But I couldn't hear fully what the brother was saying, but each of these Vedas that we're talking about, they each have specific things that they focus on. So the Yajurveda is specifically focusing on the ritual worships. I think it's Atharva Veda. This focuses a lot on their magical rituals, their incantations, some daily practices of their life. The Rig Veda, for example, deals with cosmology and deities, how the universe was created, and so forth. And the Sama Veda has a lot of their classical music and their dance and their melodious chants. So all 4 of them focus on specific different topics, but all of them are known as they're regarded as authentic.
So this might be a good point to bring up what Adnan Rashid was mentioning. Because he talks about the interview that happened on Dawa Wise with the Hindu. And he made so this is where Hinduism becomes quite difficult to pin down in one particular aspect. Because I guess he's somewhat of an authority to some degree in Hinduism, and he was sort of making the opposite claim, that none of these texts were wahi, if I remember what Adnan was saying.
Yeah, so just to what extent do Hindus, both the laity and the scholarly classes, consider these books to be divinely inspired in much the same way as we would as Muslims, through a medium or spoken as God's word directly?
I think all of them. It's quite widely regarded that these are the authoritative texts within Hinduism. These are the books that they cite from as their classical sources.
So okay.
But we don't know who wrote them.
Say again?
I said we don't know who wrote them or when they were revealed. These are
Right,
things
but so to what extent is it effective to go into these books and to use quotations the like of which you've kind of alluded to? And this goes to our 4th part of the session, actually, or the final part of the session, which is how to do dawah to these people as well, how to Hindus. To what extent is using passages from the Bhagavad Gita or from the Rig Veda, whatever it may be, Upanishads, or Mahabharata, or, I'm not pronouncing it right probably, but to what extent is doing that an effective strategy for dawah, in your opinion, Ahmed, first?
This is the format that Dr. Zakir Naik followed with.
Yes.
He always quoted from the Upanishads, from the Vedas, because he felt these could not be denied, right? With these other stories, these other literature, they play a crucial role, in Hinduism, but they're not considered necessarily wahi, right? That these are written by our great scholars, but they understand.
Which ones are not wahi for them?
Like what fall under the category of smruti, right? They had the shruti, which they consider the authoritative, the Upanishads, the Vedas. These are like the direct sources, like their Quran. That they believe that their sages, their rishis, right, what are similar to the prophets brought down with them. So,
okay. So what do you think of let me open it to the floor, but let me start with you, Ahmed. The approach, because you mentioned Zakir Naik, and to be fair, he probably is the global leader in dawah to Hindus. He is. In the last, I would say, 50 years, on the scale that he has been able to do it, it's probably been his most notable, unique contribution, actually, if you really think about it, his approach to dawah to Hindus in particular. And what I was going to ask was, as you've mentioned, he does two things, from what I remember. And, I've seen his discussions with Sri Ravi Shankarji and this guys, and the other Hindu guy, I forget his name. Some time ago I watched them. And as you mentioned, this was the format of the discussion. So it would be more like similarities. I think there's something, obviously he knows the culture more than we do. He lives in India. He's an Indian himself. And he seemed to want to kind of find a common ground with them. So similarities between Hinduism and Islam, that would be a regular title that he would put. And then in that, he would have two overarching arguments. One is, if you look at the Vedas, the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads and all of these things, you'll find the mention of one God. You'll find that God is like without form, as you've mentioned, and so on. So many things that kind of coalesce or otherwise coincide with the Islamic belief system, Aqidah, creed. And this is the second part of it, you'll also find this kaki figure, this figure called the kaki, or in the Sanskrit, the Indian is an avatar, but then his father's name is the servant of God, and his mother's name is it's like Amina, whatever the Prophet Muhammad's name was, and then he'll be victorious in fighting. So it sounds like talking about a prophetic figure that's going to come at the end of this, and it actually sounded to me, growing up listening to it, quite convincing. It sounded quite convincing, but to what extent is it academically robust, and to what extent is it effective? These are two very important questions. Number one, to what extent is using this approach? It's not, first of all, to what extent is it legitimate? We've already kind of alluded to that, because we've said that it's not inconceivable for us to say that there was a religion that was corrupted in the past and it was an Indic religion. Fine, it could be Buddhism, it could be Christianity, Hinduism, not Sikhism. In fact, we wouldn't say that that was one of them, because it came after Islam. But so it's legitimate to use this line of argumentation. Now, the second thing is, to what extent is it academically robust? So I'll bring it to the floor. To what extent is it academically robust to take these sayings from the Bhagavad Gita and the Vedas and the Upanishads or whatever it may be, and to say that they're saying that God is one, and that he has no partners, and that he has no form, and that also there's going to be this figure, and the Kaki figure, his name is Kaki, avatar in the end of times, and that he's going to resemble the Prophet in his description. So what do you guys think?
So what I would say is that from an academic standpoint, if you read many of the academic literature, they're not citing these stories. They're not citing these stories as proof. They're always citing the Vedas and the Upanishads, largely these texts, because these are the ones that all of them agree upon. They're the most authoritative in what they consider to be wahi. And for us, I think it's the best option for us as well, because these texts are very clearly monotheistic when one reads it. It's a very, as Prince Mohammed Hijab said, they're philosophical explanations of Tawheed. So for us, when we are going and if we want to speak with them, about the similarities between the two, I believe that quoting these two books, quoting the passages, and also quoting the commentaries of their great scholars who, when they comment on these verses, are elucidating monotheism. So, and then I believe that the strategy that Dr. Zakir Naik has employed has been extremely successful. And I don't think there's necessarily a need to recreate the wheel, in the sense that because the more you go into these other literature, the more corruption you'll find. The more harder it will be to argue that it's monotheistic or it has similarities with Islam. But if we go to the core text, there we can see clear similarities. And I think if many Hindus read it, they'll see that, and they realize that this is coming from their most authoritative text. I think many of them will have to kind of reconsider Islam or kind of reshape it. So that's the first thing. The second point you mentioned about the Kalki avatar, there's a book one Hindu professor wrote, I think it's called Kalki Avatar or Muhammad Sahib, meaning the Kalki avatar and Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And he mentioned some of the arguments that you mentioned, and he has some other arguments. So I think the Kalki avatar is known throughout the Hindu tradition. I think most of them have an idea of it. Also tied to that is the Hindu belief of the cycles of life. So the Kali Yuga, for example, is what they call the last phase of life. This is where they believe that there's going to be corruption, people are going to leave religion, tyrants are going to abuse their power, and such and such. And many Hindus believe that we are currently in that state. So I think if we can somehow tie together the idea that, because they say that in the Kali Yuga state is when the Kalki avatar will come. Right?
When? Sorry?
They say that in the Kali Yuga state.
And what's that? What's that state? Sorry.
So that's the last state of humanity. So they say that since the beginning, humans go through this cycle, right? I forgot the earlier names, but the last cycle of human existence is called the Kali Yuga, and this cycle is characterized by things such as atheism, people leaving religion, people. I think I also read interesting children disobeying their parents.
Is that
which
like
is what the problem
in the times then?
That's what he said, yeah.
Synonymous.
Yeah, that's what he said. But what I was going to say, Ahmed, is what would be the top verses, or I mean, what's the best arguments that you've come across in that book that you read?
It's been a while. If you go on their Wikipedia page of the book, it lists out all the arguments. So we can.
What's the name of the book again? For Kalki Avatar and Muhammad Sahib.
Yeah.
Okay, beautiful.
So like for example, some of the things they say is that, if people are interested, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf actually did a lecture just recently called "The Praiseworthy in World Scriptures." So he looked at the Prophet ﷺ and all of the major world religion scriptures. So he also did it with Hinduism. So he goes a little bit, I think, more in depth here. But one of the similarities is that the name for Kalki Avatar was a man named, they believe it's a man named Narashan. And the name Narashan means praiseworthy. So he argued that the name Muhammad ﷺ was also praiseworthy.
Yeah, that's
the
what
Kalki would be born. This next point is, I think, interesting. He says that the Kalki is going to be born on the 12th day of their month, which is called Madhu, which is the first month in their lunar calendar, and that the Prophet ﷺ was also born on the 12th day of Rabi al-Awwal, which is the first month of the Islamic lunar calendar. Another thing he mentions is that the Kalki will be born in this village, and one of the descriptions of the village is that it's a land that's filled with date trees. And the similarities, he says that. And
they don't have that in India, do they?
I don't think it's that widespread. It's not every city like the city was known for having date trees. So, and Mecca was the same. It was filled with date palms.
Still is.
Last point, which you briefly mentioned, is that the Kalki's father and mother, their name would be Vishnuyash Sumati, which basically means a good and a peaceful woman. and that the Prophet ﷺ's parents' name are Abdullah and Amina also mean the servant of God and a peaceful woman. So
That's
I
pretty
think if we
powerful,
can-
man. That's pretty powerful.
So I think these
And the
things-
sources check out for every single thing you've just mentioned. Yeah?
Yeah, it's all here. All the references are here. So I think if we're able to kind of combine, use verses from the Upanishads, from the Vedas, use the commentaries from their own classical scholars, right? They have some scholars as well which are well regarded, and then talking about the Kalki avatar, talking about what the Kali Yuga state is like, and then making the argument that the Prophet ﷺ meets the criteria of that. I think that would be a very strong. I think that would be a very robust argument.
Okay, beautiful. I think we should definitely stick to that. I would only add that we should start with Tawheed as well. Like a lot of the arguments I feel are so relevant. When we read the Quran today and we see like those arguments against shirk, they are so relevant to Hindu discourse. What Abraham said to his people, what Noah said to his people, and so on. They are it's so simple, and the layperson will just. It's so clear to the layperson.
It's funny as well because in the Quran Allah says, "Have you seen those who take their own desires for worship?" And you'll often find when it comes to like Hindus, they worship particular gods based on particular desires. So if they desire a certain thing, they'll go to the god which will fulfill that.
Yes.
So there's a sort of link there as well in terms of a description of them and what they do with regards to their worship.
Well, I think this is a good place to stop because we've covered so much today. I think we've had like a 3-hour session. I want to thank you, Ahmad. You can send me your recording on my email, and I'll send it to the cameraman. Maybe we can merge it or something when you speak. We'll see what happens. If we can't, then it's fine. Either way, it's all good. But it has been pretty intense. But this is a major world religion, and we have to get at least the basics right. And then maybe people that are going to comment and say, well, you guys should have thought about this, or there's additions and subtractions. And for not just the Muslim community, but people who are versed in Indic religions and or believe in them, it's an open conversation. And what we're trying to do above all else is to understand this religion so that we can engage with the people who profess such a religion. But it has been very informative. I've learned so much today, and I want to thank all of you for participation. I think it's a very fruitful conversation. And until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.